The city streets were alive with energy, honking taxis, flashing billboards, the scent of street food mixing with the cool night air. For the first time in years, the millionaire walked among ordinary people. No security. No flashing cameras. No one parting the way for him. He was just another face in the crowd. And yet, he felt more real than he ever had before. They stopped at a small diner on a quiet street corner. It wasn't a high-end restaurant, no private chefs, no reservations. Just a simple place filled with the sound of clinking plates and quiet laughter. The kind of place he never would have set foot in before. But now, it felt right. His wife sat across from him in the booth, watching him with that same unreadable expression. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He looked down at his hands. Hands that had once signed billion-dollar deals. Hands that had once held everything. And now? Now they held nothing. But instead of regret, he felt something else. Relief. "No," he said finally. "I don't." Her lips curled into a small smile. "Good." A waitress walked over, refilling their coffee cups. "Rough day?" she asked kindly, noticing his tired expression. The millionaire hesitated. How could he possibly explain? That he had walked away from the life most people dreamed of? That he had given up power, money, influence, all for the unknown? But as he looked into the woman's warm, kind eyes, he realized. She didn't care about any of that. She just saw a man. Not a millionaire. Not a businessman. Just a person sitting in a diner, starting over. "Something like that," he said, taking a sip of coffee. And for the first time in a long time, he felt human. Months passed. The transition wasn't easy. He had spent years believing money solved everything, but now he had to work. He took small jobs. Learned how to live without a safety net. And somewhere along the way, he realized something. Happiness had never been in the penthouses, the power plays, or the offshore accounts. It had been in the simple things. A morning coffee. A quiet evening walk. A life lived without fear. For years, he had been a prisoner in his own empire. Now, he was finally free. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, he sat with his wife on the rooftop of their small apartment. "You always knew this was how it would end, didn't you?" he asked. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I hoped," she admitted. "But I wasn't sure if you'd see it in time." His chest tightened. If he had chosen differently that night. If he had accepted their offer. He would have become one of them. And he knew now, that wasn't a life. It was just another kind of prison. He exhaled deeply, watching the city below. He had started over. He had lost everything. And in doing so, he had gained the one thing money could never buy. Peace. The mansion felt different. Lighter. Quieter. The shadowed figure was gone, but its presence still lingered in the millionaire's mind. He had made his choice. He had walked away from everything. But what did that even mean? What happened now? His power was gone. His empire was gone. His money, his name, his connections, everything he had built over a lifetime had crumbled in just days. He should have felt rage. Despair. But instead, for the first time in his life, he felt free. His wife stood by the window, watching the city lights. She had been waiting for this moment. He knew that now. "You were never just my wife, were you?" he said quietly. She turned, her expression unreadable. "I was never just anything." His chest tightened. "You were testing me," he said, realization creeping in. "The whole marriage. The whole bet." She shook her head. "I wasn't testing you," she said softly. "I was giving you a chance. A chance to see. A chance to understand. A chance to walk away. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. What happens now? Her gaze softened. That depends on you. He frowned. I have nothing left. She smiled. You have everything. He almost laughed. Everything? He was a nobody now. A man without wealth. Without power. How was that everything? She stepped forward, her voice quiet but strong. You're free, she said. For the first time in your life, you're free. His heart pounded. Freedom. He had spent his entire life chasing power, never realizing that he was always a prisoner to it. And now that it was gone, he had never felt more alive. The city stretched before him, vast and endless. For years, he had looked down on it from above, from the top floors of skyscrapers, from the seats of private jets. But now, he would have to walk through it. Start over. Find out who he really was without the money, without the arrogance, without the chains of wealth keeping him locked in a gilded cage. It terrified him. But for the first time in his life, it also excited him. That night, he and his wife left the mansion for the last time. No cars. No guards. Just two people walking into the unknown. And as they stepped into the city, the millionaire finally understood. He had lost everything. And that was the greatest gift he had ever received. The millionaire's pulse hammered in his ears. Your soul. The words echoed in his mind, wrapping around his thoughts like a noose. This wasn't about money. It had never been. The bet, the marriage, the downfall, it had all been a game. But not his game. And now, the final move was his. Walk away and disappear? Or stay and become one of them? His wife stood at his side, calm as ever. Watching. Waiting. She had known all along. His hands clenched into fists. He had spent his whole life winning. Climbing. Controlling. Owning. Now they wanted him to give it all up? No. That wasn't who he was. His gaze snapped to the shadowed figure before him. You think I'll just surrender? He spat. A slow chuckle. The figure tilted its head. Then you choose power. The air grew thick. You will serve, the figure continued. As all of us do. The words sent a chill through his spine. The world wasn't what he thought it was. The powerful men he had envied, feared, competed with, they weren't just ruthless businessmen. They belonged to something bigger. Something older. And if he stayed, he wouldn't just become rich again. He would become one of them. A part of the unseen hand that moved the world. But at what cost? He turned to his wife. You knew this was coming. She didn't deny it. You led me here, he accused. She sighed, her voice softer. I tried to show you. Show me what? That there's another way. His chest tightened. Another way. The first option. Walk away. Leave behind his money, his power, his entire life. Start over as nothing. No wealth. No name. No control. He stared at her, the realization crashing down on him. That's what you did, he whispered. Her expression didn't change. You were one of them, he said. And you walked away. The pieces fit together now. That's why the others feared her. She had done the one thing they didn't expect. She had left. And she had been waiting for him to figure it out. The figure in the suit watched silently. The choice is yours, it said. The room felt like it was shrinking. Two paths. One would make him powerful beyond imagination. The other would make him a nobody. His entire life had been spent chasing power, wealth, dominance. But for the first time, he saw what it had done to him. To the men around him. To the world. And he didn't want to be part of it anymore. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. I choose to leave. The air went still. The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it nodded. Then you are no longer ours. The shadows in the room began to fade. The weight on his chest lifted. And then, the figure turned to his wife. You were right about him, it said. And then, just like that, it was gone. The millionaire exhaled sharply. It was over. He turned to his wife. She was smiling. You made the right choice, she said. And for the first time in his life, he believed her. You stay, it said. And you join us. The air crackled with unseen energy. A decision had to be made. And he only had one chance to get it right. His wife looked at him, her expression unreadable. This is your test, she whispered. And for the first time, he realized. She had already made hers. The millionaire had spent his life controlling people. But now, someone else was controlling him. The realization burned in his chest like acid. His empire was gone. His wealth was meaningless. And the woman he had married as part of a bet, she was the only one who still stood tall. She hadn't lost anything. If anything, she had gained power. And that terrified him. The shadows in the mansion weren't just shadows anymore. At night, he felt them watching. Sometimes, he would hear footsteps when no one was there. Sometimes, he would see movement in the mirrors, not his own. Something was closing in on him. And his wife knew exactly what it was. That night, he found her standing on the rooftop balcony, staring at the city below. Her silhouette was calm, unmoving. Like she was waiting. He stormed up to her, his pulse hammering in his ears. You keep saying I need to decide, he said, voice tight. Decide what? She turned to face him, her eyes almost glowing under the city lights. Whether you'll fight them, she said simply. He frowned. Fight who? She tilted her head. The ones who set you up to fail. His chest tightened. Who are they? He demanded. She took a step closer. They're the ones who control everything, she said softly. They decide who rises. Who falls. They pick kings and crush empires. His breath caught. That didn't make sense. They're not human, are they? He whispered. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. They were, once. A sharp knock on the door downstairs made them both freeze. His stomach twisted. It was past midnight. No one should be here. His wife let out a slow breath. They've come for your answer. His blood ran cold. Answer to what? But she didn't respond. She only turned and walked toward the stairs. And for the first time, he hesitated before following her. The front door swung open on its own. The wind outside was still. And yet, something entered the house. A tall figure in a black suit, face completely obscured by shadows. His very presence felt wrong. The air in the room grew heavy. The millionaire's mouth went dry. His instincts screamed at him to run. But his wife didn't flinch. The figure stopped in front of them. You were warned, the voice said, deep, emotionless. The millionaire's hands clenched into fists. I don't even know what this game is, he snapped. The figure tilted its head slightly. You played the bet, it said. But you failed to understand the stakes. The millionaire swallowed hard. And what are the stakes? A slow pause. Then. Your soul. His breath hitched. No. No, this was insane. This was. You have two choices, the figure continued. Leave behind everything. Walk away from this life. Disappear, and you may yet be free. The millionaire's heart pounded. And the other choice? A slow, cruel smile curled the edges of the shadowy figure's lips. The millionaire was drowning. Not in water, but in something worse, doubt, fear, and the terrifying realization that he was no longer in control. For his entire life, money had ruled everything. It bought loyalty. It bent people to his will. It built his empire. But now, for the first time, money meant nothing. Because something else was moving the pieces of the game. And he had no idea who, or what, was behind it. The first real betrayal came the next morning. His most trusted business partner, a man who had been with him since his first million, walked into his office with cold, dead eyes. "It's over," the man said, sliding a document across the desk. The millionaire frowned, picking it up. It was a termination contract. His own company was cutting him out. "You can't be serious," he scoffed. "You think you can just push me out?" His partner sighed. "You don't get it, do you?" "Get what?" "The people above us, the real ones in control, they don't want you in the game anymore." The millionaire's stomach twisted. "What people?" he demanded. But the man just shook his head. "You married the wrong woman." The words hit like a hammer. The wrong woman. Again. The same warning. The same ominous message. And just like that, his entire empire was gone. His accounts remained frozen. His lawyers refused to take his calls. Doors that had always been open to him were now locked shut. This wasn't just a business collapse. It was something bigger. Someone was pulling strings. And the terrifying part? His wife didn't seem surprised. That evening, he cornered her in the massive penthouse kitchen, his pulse pounding in his ears. "You knew," he said, gripping the edge of the counter. She didn't deny it. "Who are they?" he demanded. "The people who are doing this to me?" Her expression softened, almost like pity. "They're not the ones doing this to you," she said quietly. He blinked. "What?" She took a slow step forward. "You are." His breath hitched. "What does that mean?" he growled. She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You made a bet with the wrong people. You thought you were playing a game, but they were playing you." The room felt smaller, tighter. "Who are they?" he whispered. At that, his wife finally gave him the truth. "The ones who decide who wins and who loses." And then, the door behind them creaked open. A shadow moved in the hallway. They weren't alone. The millionaire's blood turned to ice. He spun around, but there was no one there. Only a soft, lingering voice. "He doesn't understand yet." The millionaire staggered back, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Who said that?" he demanded. But his wife only gave him one last warning. "You need to decide, before they decide for you." And then, the lights flickered. For the first time, he realized the bet was never about her. It was about him. And if he didn't figure out the truth soon, he wouldn't survive it. And then, with the faintest smile, she said, "Does it matter?" His heart slammed against his ribs. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure of the answer. And in that moment, just for a second, he saw something in her eyes. Something not human. It was gone in an instant. But that moment was enough. His heart slammed against his ribs. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't dealing with an ordinary woman. He was dealing with something far beyond his understanding. And for the first time since this bet began, he realized he had made a mistake. The millionaire barely slept that night. His wife's words echoed in his mind, over and over. And what if I am? She was playing with him. He knew it. This had started as a game, a bet. A simple challenge he had every intention of winning. But suddenly, he found himself on the losing end, his empire crumbling while she sat there, untouched, thriving. Something about her was wrong. Or maybe, something about her was beyond his understanding. The next morning, he woke up to another disaster. A legal notice sat on his desk. One of his biggest projects, a billion-dollar development deal, had been seized by the government. Just like that. Gone. His hands trembled as he read through the letter. Due to undisclosed violations, your project has been terminated indefinitely. No further appeals will be granted. Violations? There were no violations. He had bribed the right people, pulled every necessary string. This should have been impossible. Then came the final blow. A phone call from his bank. Sir, I regret to inform you that your accounts are currently under investigation. Your assets have been temporarily frozen. His blood ran cold. Frozen, he repeated. Are you out of your mind? I have more money than. Sir, the banker interrupted, his tone strangely nervous, this is beyond us. There's nothing we can do. The line went dead. And just like that, in 48 hours, everything he had built, the power, the respect, the control, was slipping away like sand through his fingers. That evening, he sat in the dim glow of his study, staring at the swirling amber liquid in his glass. His hands still trembled. His mind raced through every possible explanation. But no matter how hard he tried, every road led back to her. His wife. She was the only thing that had changed in his life. The moment she entered his world, everything began to collapse. But how? How could one woman do this? He needed answers. He started watching her. Closely. And the more he observed, the stranger things became. His staff treated her differently. Not like a boss's wife, but like someone important. Everywhere they went, people recognized her. High-end restaurants, exclusive clubs, powerful people showed her respect, even fear. Then, something impossible happened. One evening, he followed her to the balcony, where she stood under the stars, a peaceful expression on her face. I know you're there, she said without turning around. He froze. Slowly, she turned to face him, tilting her head in amusement. Still trying to figure me out? His jaw tightened. You're hiding something. She took a slow step toward him. And what do you think that is? His chest tightened. He didn't know. He didn't know anything anymore. Then, it happened. The chandelier above them flickered. A cold wind swept through the room, despite all the windows being shut. The millionaire sat frozen, his wife's words lingering in the air like an unanswered question. You think you're in control, don't you? He forced a laugh, shaking off the unease creeping into his chest. Of course, I am, he said, standing up, adjusting his silk robe. Everything is going exactly as planned. She simply smiled, a knowing smile, before turning back to her tea. But things weren't going as planned. Not even close. By noon, he was on the phone, his frustration bubbling. What do you mean the deal fell through? He snapped at his assistant. I'm sorry, sir, came the nervous reply. The investors pulled out this morning. No explanation. His jaw clenched. That was the third major deal lost in 24 hours. These were contracts that had been set in stone, agreements with people who never backed out of anything. Something wasn't right. He rubbed his temples, scrolling through his emails. Rejection. Termination. Sudden cancellations. Everything he had built was collapsing, fast. And yet. He turned toward the woman sitting on the couch, casually flipping through a book, as if she had all the time in the world. She seemed unaffected. No, more than that. She seemed at peace. Unlike him. Over the next few days, the shifts became impossible to ignore. Every business meeting he attended ended in failure. No one wanted to work with him anymore. His connections, his power, were slipping through his fingers. And at the same time, strange things were happening around his wife. Their housekeepers, who usually barely acknowledged her presence, now treated her with unusual respect. The gardener, who never spoke more than a few words, now smiled warmly whenever she walked by. And one afternoon, when they visited a high-end restaurant, something even stranger happened. A wealthy CEO, someone the millionaire had been chasing for years to land a contract, walked straight past him and greeted his wife instead. "It's an honor to see you again," the CEO said, shaking her hand. "Likewise," she replied with a small smile. The millionaire sat there, stunned. Again? She had never mentioned knowing this man. How was that possible? When the CEO finally turned to him, his face had lost its warmth. "You're lucky," he said in a clipped tone. "Take care of her." And with that, he walked away, leaving the millionaire gripping his glass so tightly he thought it might break. That night, as they lay in bed, he turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. "Who are you?" She looked at him with amusement. "Your wife." "Don't play games with me," he said, his patience running thin. "You're hiding something." She leaned in closer, her gaze unwavering. "And what if I am?" For the first time in his life, the millionaire felt something unfamiliar, fear. He had made a bet, thinking he was in control. But what if, from the very beginning, the bet had never been his to win? For the first time in his life, he wasn't so sure. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of expensive suits rubbing against each other, and the scent of overpriced cigars filled the air. The dimly lit private lounge, tucked away in the heart of a city that never slept, was a place where power reeked in every corner. Here, men with too much money and too little conscience played with lives like pieces on a chessboard. A smirk spread across the millionaire's lips as he leaned back into the plush leather chair, swirling the whiskey in his hand. His so-called friends sat across from him, their laughter coated with arrogance. They had been playing a dangerous game all night, placing bets on absurd dares, each more ruthless than the last. Then, one of them leaned in, a devilish grin on his face. "I've got a real challenge for you," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "Marry a plus-size woman. Someone who doesn't fit in with our world. Stay with her for a year. Make everyone believe it's real." The others erupted into laughter. The millionaire raised an eyebrow, feigning amusement. "And what's in it for me?" "5 million. Silence fell over the room. The number was no joke. He scoffed. "That's pocket change." "Fine." The man smirked. 10 million. If you can convince everyone, including her, that you're madly in love. But if you fail, you walk away from this circle. For good. A dangerous bet. But then again, he never backed down from a challenge. Deal. He had no doubt he could pull this off. Women had always been easy to charm, and this would be no different. Besides, what harm could it do? The wedding was a spectacle. Lavish, extravagant, designed to convince the world that this was a love story for the ages. The millionaire played his part well, smiling for the cameras, whispering sweet nothings into his new bride's ear. She, on the other hand, was different from what he expected. She wasn't insecure or desperate for his validation. She carried herself with an ease that unsettled him. She didn't look like a woman being fooled. As they stood at the altar, her gaze locked onto his with an intensity that made his confidence waver. For the first time, he felt as though he was the one being studied. But he brushed the feeling off. This was all a game, and he was in control. Or so he thought. The night after the wedding, something strange happened. The millionaire woke up to find his phone flooded with messages. Deals he had secured just days ago were suddenly falling apart. The stocks he had invested in plummeted overnight. His closest business associate, someone he had known for years, cut all ties with him without explanation. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. Until he noticed something else. His new wife sat across the room, sipping tea, completely calm, as if she knew something he didn't. And then, as she set her cup down, she looked at him and smiled. "You think you're in control, don't you?" The words sent a chill down his spine.